Chapter 1, Happy Hour in Hell, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Apocalypse. 1.1 The Infernal Boardroom. Hell wasn't what you'd expect. No fire and brimstone. No shrieking sinners being poked with pitchforks by gleeful demons. Instead, imagine the DMV on a bad day. Multiply the inefficiency by a factor of eternal damnation, and throw in some flickering fluorescent lights that hummed a note just sharp enough to be perpetually annoying. This was hell, or at least its administrative sector. Lucifer, looking remarkably like a mid-level manager who'd missed his last 3 performance reviews, slammed a manicured hand on the mahogany table. Or rather, the table that aspired to be mahogany, but was actually some infernal composite material that smelled faintly of sulfur and regret. "All right, you miserable lot," he drawled, his voice dripping with the ennui that only millennia of soul processing could cultivate. "We have a situation." Around the table sat a motley crew. There was a pasty-faced accountant who'd embezzled his way into eternal torment, a surprisingly chipper serial killer named Brenda. She insisted it was ironic, a gaggle of fallen angels sporting tattered wings and expressions of perpetual boredom, and for some inexplicable reason, a mime. His name tag read Marcel, Senior VP, Department of Eternal Torment Nonverbal, so no one bothered him. Situation? Brenda chirped, twirling a rather rusty shiv between her fingers. "Did someone run out of pitchfork polish again? Because I specifically requested the extra glossy finish for my latest project." Lucifer shot her a withering glare. "Worse, Brenda. Much worse." He leaned forward, lowering his voice as if to share a particularly juicy secret. "We're going to kill God." A beat of silence followed this pronouncement. The fluorescent lights buzzed. The accountant coughed. Marcel mimed an elaborate shrug. "Isn't that sort of your thing, Luce?" asked one of the fallen angels, a blonde bombshell named Azrael, who was currently filing her talons into razor-sharp points. "You know, the whole rebellion against the Almighty gig? Seemed like you were pretty committed." "That was eons ago," Lucifer snapped, waving a dismissive hand. "Ancient history. Water under the bridge, or rather, lava under the bridge, as it were. Besides, I was going for a hostile takeover vibe back then, not outright deity deletion. And there's no workplace harassment insurance covering attempted deicide, mind you. These guys..." Lucifer gestured towards the fallen angels. "Just want dental." "Look," Lucifer continued, pinching the bridge of his nose. "The point is, the old man's gone off the deep end. He's not just vengeful and arbitrary anymore. He's actively malicious. Turns out running the universe is a lot harder than creating it. Now he blames us, particularly me. Says I'm a terrible manager." Lucifer pouted. "But at least my accounting is sound," he mumbled, mostly to himself, pointing a manicured finger at the accountant. "He hates humanity. And apparently," his voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, "he's planning something big." "Bigger than the flood?" asked the accountant, nervously adjusting his glasses. "Bigger than the dinosaurs," offered Brenda helpfully. "Bigger than that reality show he created with the Kardashians," Azrael added with a shudder. Lucifer nodded gravely. "Exactly. We're talking end of days with extra steps and a particularly nasty twist ending. Something that LL give me migraines for all of eternity." He shuddered theatrically. "That will impact MY bottom line." Marcel mimed, holding a phone to his ear and raising one eyebrow inquiringly. "Yes, Marcel, even you should be concerned," Lucifer said, rolling his eyes. "This affects everyone, even the mimes." A collective groan echoed around the table. "So, what's the plan, boss?" Brenda asked, a gleam in her eye that suggested she was already envisioning creative ways to dispatch a deity. Lucifer smiled, a slow, predatory grin that could curdle milk. "That, my friends, is where things get interesting. I've assembled the most formidable team ever devised. And one of us shall be the key." He produced a remote and pressed a button. The wall slid open to reveal another room, Even more bizarrely populated, a collection of misfits Lucifer began to call forth one by one. First, Lucifer began, and the crowd watched with great anticipation Prometheus. A figure stepped into the light. Muscular, shirtless, scarred, he carried himself with the air of a seasoned warrior. But his eyes, instead of holding the fire of battle, held the weary focus of a man used to handling details, logistics. Around his wrist, a complex device made from scavenged parts pulsed with a soft, blue light. "He asked the guy who gave you fire," whispered Azrael to a fallen angel with very bad teeth who seemed unimpressed looking down. "Don't underestimate him just because he had bad press lately, folks," yelled Lucifer with an exaggerated laugh. "They called me mad, a thief, a rebel. But I saw the potential, the spark, and the blueprints from that old bastard's notes on that iPad were surprisingly detailed." Prometheus declared matter-of-factly, "They say stealing fire from the gods was my greatest sin. Ha! I say it was only the beginning." A smile danced over his lips as he brandished a half-finished gauntlet. "It took a lot of calculations, but essentially you will all understand what I did. So keep paying attention, angels. See, it's like I was playing Jenga. A game. Essentially what God did in this so-called creation. It has lots of flaws, not in terms of overall physical construct, but by observing the stars and the inherent energy in all that is, I devised that this reality matrix, as he likes to call it, can be pulled into one specific dimension. By exploiting this fact, through application of my very special glove here, once I finish the whole fabric of what God has designed and upholds, I'll just snap." A wave of murmuring went across the boardroom table. "Sounds like an overly complex plan for, just smashing him," remarked the accountant, a slight whimper to his voice. "Well, how did you want to deal with God?" Retorted Prometheus and gestured at Lucifer. "I got my instructions, and quite frankly, this is easier to implement if only I could find enough of the components." Lucifer ignored the byplay between his two champions and raised a hand, indicating a petite woman next to enter, wearing a stylish, albeit slightly too large pantsuit. "Eva, my dears." She cleared her throat, nodded briskly, turned and faced the boardroom's motley crew of bored listeners, and raised a tablet in front of her. "Good afternoon. My name is Eva, and I'll be heading the public relations and communications side of this endeavor," Eva began, her voice smooth and efficient, honed from centuries of practice. "Our initial research suggests a perceptible gap between God's current PR strategy and public perception. Key concerns are his increasingly erratic behavior, the lack of transparency surrounding natural disasters, frankly, quite amateurishly staged if I may add this, dear, absolutely no showmanship, and that whole hellfire and brimstone PR is decidedly not resonating with the millennial demographic." The voice of Azrael, slightly muffled by the file on her claws, interjected, a low whisper, audible nonetheless. "That's probably where they came up with that song. Hellfire, hellfire. Don, we own that song? Shouldn't we get money when people hear that? Where do I lodge a formal complaint?" Lucifer pointed a silencing finger at Azrael and smiled broadly. "We're proposing a rebrand. A softer, more approachable God. Perhaps a name change? The Almighty is a bit aggressive, don't you think?" Brenda raised her hand. "Can we call him Fluffy?" she said, her face set in complete seriousness. Lucifer seemed to ignore Brenda's interjection, and he made another theatric gesture. A very portly, elderly man with one leg stepped into the boardroom. He looked bewildered. The room fell silent for several moments before Lucifer seemed to break a trance. He quickly ran towards him, gently placing a hand on the old man's back and, with his most soothing voice yet, told him, very much as an aside, "Just wait a minute, Gramps, your time will come." He addressed the listeners in the boardroom, his grin returning, slowly turning into a sly smirk. "Don't underestimate the power of wisdom," pointing to his own temples. Before anyone could utter another syllable, Jufka entered the room, looked around, and started roaring. The noises he made didn't resemble speech, yet everyone could understand it quite perfectly. His anger was infectious, primal. Many fell from their chairs, as if their very senses had left their control, leaving behind nothing but fear of their unknown assailant's wrath. "Don't you know you have to bring offerings? And not only yourselves. What is that supposed to be? We want him gone. Go fetch, come back, then we party," uttered Jufka in his roaring, yet understandable, howl, not even making eye contact with anyone in particular, kicking his feet, gesturing like a rabid ape on his way out, just like he came in. Another man walked into the room, very tall, carrying himself as if used to constant admiration. "Apologies, everyone, it takes but a few minutes to arrange for the best entertainment in town," he chuckled, and with him, almost in tow, floated Ahoi Sharon, looking both ethereal and extremely artificial at the same time, like a creature out of time itself, clad in sparkling, transparent robes. A loud gasp could be heard from the one-legged old man's direction, but Lucifer silenced him with an annoyed huff. "I want everyone to take a good, deep look at what happens when you combine perfect artificial beauty with artificial intelligence. That's it." Ahoi Sharon just stood in the middle of the room. As everyone's gaze fell upon her, she started transforming. At first slowly, almost unnoticeable. Her perfect body started showing rolls of fat in places it just should not be, oozing with pus and sweat. Her makeup turned into grotesque caricature, like a grotesque representation of all that's hidden by it in this day and age. But all the while, her perfect blue eyes stared, almost without expression, at her surroundings, transfixing the gaze of her onlookers. Many screamed or covered their mouths, but after just a brief second or two, the horrific illusion of perfect AI gone haywire gave way again to what everyone thought would be her typical representation, even though, looking closer, several imperfections still lingered on, and the previously ethereal image now seemed slightly aggressive. Still perfect and untouchable, but like a beautiful wasp, ready to strike. Chapter 2, God's Existential Crisis, or Is It Me? Am I the Drama? 2.18 Tuesday in Paradise. Heaven wasn't what the brochures promised. For one, there were far too many harps and clouds, an endless expanse of fluffy, white, cumulus abominations that stretched in every direction, occasionally parting to reveal, surprise. More clouds. God, perched precariously on what could only be described as a throne made of solidified air and good intentions, sighed. A sigh that, had it been on Earth, would have manifested as a Category 5 hurricane. "Another Tuesday," he mumbled, his voice a low rumble that echoed through the celestial void, making several cherubs lose their balance and tumble off their designated fluff patches. He was bored. Bored out of his divine skull. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Creation had seemed like a good idea at the time. A bit of a passion project, you know? Something to fill the endless expanse of eternity. First bang. That huge universal fart. Then swirling gases, coalescing stars, a few planets, for good measure. Throw in some dinosaurs, just to mess with future archaeologists, and voila, a universe. He chuckled. Dinosaurs. Classic prank. He never gets tired of it, unlike those guys who now called themselves humans, constantly fighting and warring, never a peaceful era. Like that would ever do the trick. Anyway, then had come the crowning achievement. Humanity. In his defense, he had followed all the instructions in the Creating Sentient Beings for Dummies manual. Free will, check. Capacity for love and compassion, check. A healthy dose of self-preservation, check. But somewhere along the line, things had gone sideways. He got lazy. Started to delegate tasks he shouldn't delegate. "I gave them free will and the little shit started freeballing," he harumphed to himself, a frown set firmly on his lips before his mood switched again and he laughed again. Humans, always trying to prove their intelligence, thinking it was theirs. What they didn't know was, maybe, in his boredom, God started playing Sims again. This time, the Universe Level Edition. It got stale after a while, no excitement in any level, when all your characters start to develop an aggressive stubbornness and start to question the very foundations you put your character's existence upon. No, scratch that, God said. Sims Dawn, to start talking back at you when you put them in their place. Or, the thought was incomplete. They complained, they whined, they waged wars in his name, the irony of which was never lost on him, and they had the audacity to blame him for their own failings. It's your fault I'm miserable, they'd cry. Why did you create mosquitoes? Why is my left pinky toe slightly longer than the right? As if he micromanaged every single toenail on the planet. He had cherubims do his bidding. Did they listen? Mostly. Angels. Nowadays, you can trust anyone anymore. Except perhaps. He'd tried to spice things up a bit. A plague here, a famine there, a well-placed flood just to keep them on their toes. But it was no use. Humanity was like a particularly stubborn stain on a white carpet, impossible to remove, and frankly more trouble than it was worth. It also didn't help at all that Lucy was such a drag. Once his most trusted subordinate and manager of one of the most profitable sections. Now, reduced to counting damned souls for all eternity, getting carpal tunnel and making everyone around him just as miserable as himself. What happened to us? Thought God and looked around with no real aim or intent, but then started to really closely observe. 2.2 The Downward Spiral. The current state of affairs could best be described as a dumpster fire inside a train wreck wrapped in a shit show. Humanity was, as usual, busy proving itself to be utterly incapable of governing itself, and God was frankly sick of playing referee. He tried everything to get them to behave. Carrot and stick, plagues and wonders, floods, fires, locusts with gluten allergies, the whole shebang. But nothing worked. The yapping from all of Earth, the voices, constantly changing, had gotten a lot louder, too. His frown deepened, his brow furrowed in concentration, then his gaze sharpened. They were more intense, but somehow they seemed organized in their intensity, like the cries of a newborn, demanding attention. Yet he felt like their volume wasn't the issue. Their number, or maybe something about them, somehow amplified the sound. Why did he start noticing these voices only now, today, specifically, for the first time in many thousand years? He'd even attempted a brief foray into motivational speaking, appearing to a shepherd here, a prophet there, even trying out the whole burning bush routine. The reviews were mixed. Apparently, his message of love thy neighbor got lost in translation somewhere between stone the infidels and build a giant golden calf, but make it like really shiny. His latest project, Earth 2.0, was still in the beta testing phase, and frankly, the early feedback wasn't promising. The testers kept complaining about the lack of free will and the overabundance of mandatory kale smoothies. God sighed again, another hurricane. He really needed a new hobby, or maybe just early retirement. That is also a matter of delegate, he thought, before suddenly standing up from his chair of condensed air. His eyes lit up. It couldn't be that easy, right? There's got to be something to stop him. A safeguard, an alarm, something, some reason this path never even occurred to him. But God didn't trust in cherubims anymore. The voices he now perceived so clearly, they felt as if every child of his was somehow telepathically connected to each other, through their faith. But when he tried to listen, he could only perceive some voices. Like there were several layers, or maybe channels, he could tap into. Why? It didn't matter. It was like in one of his previous endeavors, something with cables, screens, and moving pictures that tell stories, one after another. Right motion picture. When the heroes in this particular story knew about the risk, understood the threat, but lacked the courage, the plan, to go ahead and turn what has got to be done into reality, the solution usually presenting itself at the most inconvenient of times. What was that story? With that Harry Potter guy? Or what his name? Didn't matter either. A slow smile spread across his face, an expression not seen in heaven for quite some time. "Oh yes, I will delegate." 2.3 Divine intervention of the self-destructive kind. "Gabriel," he bellowed, his voice shaking the very foundations of reality, or at least causing a minor tremor in a nearby nebula. A cherub, looking remarkably like a winged Kenny G, appeared in a puff of glitter and misplaced optimism. "Yes, Lord," he chirped, his harp emitting a painfully cheerful arpeggio. "Pack my things," God declared, a manic glint in his eye. "I'm going on vacation." Gabriel blinked, his halo slipping slightly askew. "A vacation, Lord? But where? And what about the smiting? The plagues? Tuesday is Taco Tuesday in the Celestial Cafeteria. Cancel everything," God declared. "And tell Azrael to get those fluffy dice from the gift shop. You know, the ones that say even God makes mistakes. I have a feeling I'll be needing them." He was going to delegate. It's also written in those stupid books humans cling to so dearly, as if their very lives depended on them. He decided to use these rules to his advantage. God started to laugh out loud, then immediately got hold of himself, turned, faced the still bewildered-looking Gabriel, and proclaimed, in an exaggerated, ironic tone, "Do not worry, dear Gabriel. All of this is part of my plan." Gabriel didn't need to know more than that, so he raised a finger and smiled. "Can you keep a secret, my dear, dear friend? Then listen, this once, what I will delegate to you now will be our little secret, got it?" As his smirk turned into a menacing grin while his face turned redder and redder by the second, his voice changing to something inhuman, demonic. 2. For the playlist of the end. As God prepared for his vacation, a one-way trip into oblivion, or at least a very long nap, he decided that the occasion called for a soundtrack. But not just any soundtrack. He needed something that captured the sheer absurdity, the utter ridiculousness of his current predicament. Something with pizzazz. He scrolled through his celestial playlist, mostly Gregorian chants and the occasional Handel's Messiah. He had a soft spot for the classics. Nothing seemed quite right. Too somber. Too heavenly. And then he saw it. A playlist titled Guilty Pleasures, accidentally synced from a teenager's smartphone during a recent soul-uploading mishap. He clicked on it with morbid curiosity. A blast of synthesized accordion and driving bass filled the celestial void. The sound of a language he didn't recognize, yet somehow understood. A primal, rhythmic chanting that spoke of fast cars, beautiful women, and questionable life choices. Chalga. God had discovered Bulgarian chalga, and he loved it. He imagined the look on the faces of the heavenly host as he blasted, at full volume while setting the universe to self-destruct mode. It was perfect. A final cosmic joke. A middle finger to all creation. Or better yet, it would be one final test. Another roll of dice. A game only he understands fully. A test of the most intricate making. It might very well destroy him in the process. But maybe, he smiled. This was going to be fun. Chapter 3, Team Building in Hades, or How to Train Your Demon and Other Bad Ideas. 3.1 Welcome to the HR Department of Hell. Please take a number and a soul. The recruitment drive, as Lucifer optimistically called it, was not going well. Turns out, even in hell, most residents weren't exactly enthusiastic about signing up for a suicide mission against the Almighty. Something about eternal damnation being preferable to immediate and messy disintegration by a wrathful deity. The boardroom, now rebranded as the Strategic Deicide Operations Center, SDOC, was filled with the awkward silence of a team-building exercise gone horribly wrong. Lucifer, dressed in a motivational t-shirt that read Godkiller, "Teamwork makes the dream work," tapped a pointy red fingernail against a whiteboard covered in a chaotic scrawl of half-formed plans and questionable diagrams. "All right, people, let's not get discouraged," he said, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. "We just need to, refine our pitch a little." Brenda, ever helpful, was sharpening her shiv on a whetstone, the rhythmic scritch-scratch doing little to improve the ambience. Maybe we should lead with the brutal dismemberment of the celestial tyrant part? I find that's a real crowd-pleaser. Perhaps, Lucifer mused, but we don't want to scare off the less enthusiastic candidates. He gestured to the mime Marcel, who was currently miming his own disembowelment with a surprising amount of detail. And what do we do about Sharon? We can't leave her alone, said Lucifer, pointing in the direction of a whimpering, still grotesquely misshapen, but less so, AI Sharon. 3.2 Prometheus's PowerPoint of Peril. Prometheus, ever the pragmatist, cleared his throat. If I may, Lucifer, I believe a more structured approach is required. I've prepared a brief presentation outlining the key challenges and potential solutions. He pulled out a laptop, seemingly cobbled together from spare parts and held together with duct tape, and connected it to a projector, which flickered to life, displaying a PowerPoint presentation titled, Killing God, a Practical Guide, version 1.0. The first slide featured a stick figure labeled God with a halo and a grumpy expression. Arrows pointed to various parts of the figure, with labels like omnipotence problematic, omniscience very problematic, and divine smite extremely problematic. As you can see, Prometheus began, his voice dry and matter-of-fact. Our target presents certain logistical difficulties. The presentation continued, outlining a series of increasingly outlandish and improbable plans, each involving a complex combination of stolen artifacts, questionable physics, and highly volatile substances. Slide titles included, Weaponizing Faith, Can We Turn Prayers into Bullets? The Black Hole Gambit, Risky but potentially delicious. Harnessing the Power of Paradoxes. If God can do anything, can he make a burrito so big he can't eat it? Plan B. Distract him with kittens? This slide was hastily skipped. By the end of the presentation, even Lucifer was looking slightly pale. I appreciate the detailed planning, Prometheus, Lucifer stammered and scratched his head. The calculations concerning probabilities are on page 5, section C, paragraph 3. As you can clearly see, our best statistical success in achieving our projected objective lies at around, let me recalculate precisely, 0.00076544%, with an error deviation of. Before Prometheus could start with a listing of errors in this calculation, Eva interrupted him. Thanks so much. But I think this information has got to marinate for a little longer, don't you think? This is worse than the results from my last market testing campaign, Eva interjected. I mean, all our other PR and influence metrics are through the roof right now. If I may, a new voice interjected smoothly, interrupting what seemed like a speech Eva had used on her subordinates more often than not. All heads turned to see the tall man, still carrying his elegant demeanor as before. I believe the fault lies within two main issues that have not yet been fully understood in terms of what has to happen to, his voice turned almost to a whisper on the last syllable, kill God, which, as a side note, seems harder the more I hear it. A wry smile. For one, Prometheus, although your enthusiasm regarding destructive contraptions is quite remarkable, Brenda grinned, fully in agreement. I do believe this task is much more delicate. And second, Eva, darling, do you see what's going on with Jufka over there? Jufka was, in that very moment, very invested in trying to chew his own leg, rocking to and fro and grumbling gibberish to himself, occasionally screaming, and also almost biting Azrael's right-hand thumb that happened to come too near. Yes, interjected Sledgepenner, as everyone just stared at this odd but impressive display. Why do we have a moron in tow again? Why can't he control himself? Lucifer smirked again, obviously annoyed yet trying to conceal it with another exaggerated smile. He's part of the plan. Whose plan? Blurted Eva, but fell silent at a piercing look by Lucifer. Mine? The tall man just continued talking where he had left off, ignoring Eva, seemingly not interested. Jufka will become, from what I have already gathered by way of closely examining this fine fellow, instrumental in us proceeding further with our mission. He turned to face Lucifer. If indeed your motivation and mine align on what is to happen now. The look on Lucifer's face became grave for a brief second, as if a question occurred to him he didn't yet have an answer to. After taking stock, yet again, of his present team members and associates, and seemingly dismissing his initial fear of a possible answer to his unuttered thoughts regarding the stranger's true motivation, he turned his face towards the man and answered, "Indeed, they do, as they have always done, old friend. Please, explain yourself." He chuckled again, this time slightly amused. "Well, he's a symbol," the man answered, smiling, finally looking towards Jufka, but keeping him within the range of his field of vision while simultaneously taking in all others in the room. For one, his primal drive, pure and undirected. Also, completely unfiltered in a way that no longer seems to occur naturally anymore in our civilization. It has, unfortunately, become very unhip these days, so much so that you wouldn't really imagine the depths of it, what powers lie there, ready to be set free and made use of. Like atomic energy, contained so very hard within even the most common matter there is. It takes focus, discipline, understanding of interactions on a physical, spiritual, and metaphysical level. Also, the right catalyst at the right moment. Another beat. Everyone's focus sharpened. The room had become deathly still. The man broke the silence. "But you, dear Lucy, wouldn't know much about that, I presume?" 3.3 The Death's recruiting woes, and the surprisingly efficient in turn. The Death, meanwhile, was having his own set of problems. Turns out, recruiting an army of the dead was more challenging than he'd anticipated. Most historical figures, even the famously tyrannical ones, seemed to have mellowed out in the afterlife. Genghis Khan? The Death asked, tapping a bony finger against his clipboard. A spectral figure, looking vaguely like a Mongolian warlord, shimmered into view. "Yes, we're overthrowing God," the Death explained. "Interested?" Genghis Khan's ghost shrugged. "Meh, been there, done that, conquered a third of the known world. Got the t-shirt. Besides, Tuesdays are my pottery class." The Death sighed. This was going nowhere fast. "What about Hitler?" Brenda suggested helpfully. "He seemed like a real go-getter. Currently undergoing mandatory sensitivity training," the Death mumbled, checking his notes. "Apparently, he's been having trouble with respecting personal boundaries in the afterlife. And Stalin is busy with competitive air guitar league, as usual, so he has a bust, too." It was at this point that a new figure, a young, surprisingly efficient-looking intern named Chad, who had been quietly taking notes in the corner, piped up. "Excuse me, sir," Chad said, holding up a tablet displaying a meticulously organized spreadsheet. "I've been analyzing historical data, and I believe I've identified a potential target demographic. Disgruntled office workers from the late 20th and early 21st centuries." The Death raised a skeletal eyebrow. "Disgruntled office workers?" "Yes, sir," Chad confirmed. "They're already accustomed to meaningless tasks, arbitrary rules, and soul-crushing bureaucracy. Plus," he added, tapping the tablet, "they have a surprisingly high rate of existential dread." And so, the Death's army began to take shape. An army not of demons or monsters, but of middle managers, accountants, and IT specialists, all armed with staplers, hole punchers, and the burning rage of 1,000 unanswered emails. The Death thought that this might very well turn into an operational nightmare beyond compare. Yet couldn't shake a strange sense of destiny fulfilled. Like somewhere, someone, or some entity was having fun watching this unfold. Chapter 4. Opa Eric Finds New Purpose, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Geriatric Mosh Pit. For point 1, the Ballad of Sledge Penner and the Birth of a Movement. Opa Eric, bless his shriveled, one-legged soul, wasn't exactly what you'd call a team player. In fact, before Lucifer's little recruitment drive, his main hobbies included yelling at pigeons, complaining about the price of beer, and napping in his favorite armchair, a relic from the 70s upholstered in a fabric that could only be described as aggressively orange. But something about the Kill God project had ignited a spark in his rheumy eyes. Maybe it was the promise of chaos, the chance to stick it to the man, or in this case, the Almighty. Or perhaps it was just the allure of finally having something to do besides watching reruns of Wheel of Fortune. Whatever the reason, Opa Eric had found his calling. He was the unexpected key to it all. He'd always had a knack for music, a talent he'd mostly used to annoy his neighbors with off-key renditions of Schlager hits. But now, inspired by his brief encounter with AI Sharon, and fueled by cheap schnapps and a lifetime of pent-up frustration, he'd written a song. A protest song. A song so raw, so vulgar, so utterly absurd, that it had the potential to change the world, or at least to get stuck in your head for an eternity. Or at least to become viral, whatever that meant in this brave new day and age. Just one song, thought Opa Eric. One song would make all the difference this time. He debuted Guten Morgen Kaka at a local bar, a dingy dive frequented by equally disgruntled pensioners. The reception had been enthusiastic, to say the least. Within days, the song had spread like wildfire, first through the local community, then across the internet, thanks to a shaky smartphone video uploaded by a surprisingly tech-savvy bartender. Now Opa Eric, under his newly adopted moniker Sledgepenner, a name he thought sounded international and hardcore, was an unlikely icon, a symbol of geriatric rebellion. He traded his orthopedic shoe for a combat boot, singular, sadly, as he missed the other one dearly, having grown used to it during his time serving a cause he couldn't remember the specifics of. The main point being he had served for long, though, enough for it to count. His worn-out cardigan for a leather jacket adorned with rusty safety pins and a hand-painted slogan that read, Rentner gegen Gott. Pensioners against God. He was ready to rock, but not alone. With him, by his side, always present, if slightly confused as to the purpose of it all, stood Jufka. The only thing understood by anyone, for now, was Jufka's undying loyalty towards Opa Eric. The two couldn't be any more different, but some spark of recognition, or maybe insane mutual understanding had been struck between these two. Everyone could feel this intuitively. For point two were Sin Die Alten. UND were Sin Sour. The geriatric mosh pit. Sledgepenner's concerts were a sight to behold. A seething mass of dentures, hearing aids, and rebellious energy, fueled by cheap beer and a collective fuck you to the establishment, both earthly and divine. His band, Die Apokalyptischen Rentner, the Apocalyptic Pensioners, was composed of Gerda Blitzkrieg Muller on bass, arthritic fingers, but surprisingly nimble on the frets. Horst Hammerfaust Schmidt on drums. Pacemaker kept skipping a beat, but he kept going. Ingrid Shrapnel Becker on lead guitar, suffered from tinnitus, so she just cranked the volume to 11. Jufka, the gentle giant, on triangle, and, when the time was right, surprisingly in-tune howls that shook the venue, even more than the music. Their music was a glorious cacophony of Schlager, punk, and heavy metal, a sound that could curdle milk and incite riots in equal measure. Their signature song, Guten Morgen Kaka, had become an anthem for the disenfranchised, the forgotten, the people who felt like life had given them the middle finger or the orthopedic shoe. Insert Guten Morgen Kaka lyrics here, or a variation thereof, reflecting the band's current mission. Between songs, Sledgepenner would launch into profanity-laced tirades against God, the government, and the price of prune juice. He'd spit, he'd sputter, he'd occasionally lose his balance and have to be helped up by Gerda Blitzkrieg Muller, all to the wild cheers of the audience, which grew larger with each performance, from town to town, then onward to the capital and beyond. At first, the concerts had been small, almost negligible really, but the message, its pure, unfiltered emotions that through time, seemingly only very old people are able to tap into once more in this crazy new, AI-driven, simulated, fucked up, yet also wonderful, but still fucked up, world had spread. Without Sharon's involvement, or even her having knowledge of it yet. and at just the right moment, too, Lucifer thought. 4.3 The recruitment drive and the unexpected roadie. Sledge Penner's movement attracted a diverse group of followers. Disgruntled pensioners tired of being ignored and underestimated. Conspiracy theorists who saw God as the ultimate deep state. Teenage rebels drawn to the anti-establishment message and the free beer. Jufka, surprisingly popular among young and old, rich or poor, just doing his part, for whatever it's worth. They were a ragtag bunch, united by their shared dissatisfaction with the status quo and their newfound belief in a one-legged, foul-mouthed pensioner as their unlikely messiah. One day, after a particularly rowdy concert in a small town that had gone viral, shared by Eva on channels the old folks hadn't even heard of, though the youngsters in attendance surely did, especially when AI Sharen's latest single started blasting through the speakers after a technical difficulty led to a sudden, yet brief, pause in programming during which Sledge and his crew seemed visibly distraught, but also enraged. Yelling at the roadies, a figure emerged from the crowd. It was a young man with greasy hair, a nervous twitch, and eyes that darted around as if he expected to be attacked at any moment. He introduced himself as Franz, but he would eventually become just Rhodey. He said he had a friend that he would only trust in these times, with him not feeling able enough on his own. This man's name was Carl, and he also needed some convincing to start trusting other people again, let alone someone as old and weird as Opa Eric, as he insisted everyone called him now. "I've been following your music, Mr. Penner," Franz stammered, clutching a worn-out guitar case. "And I believe in your message. I want to help." Sledge Penner eyed him up and down. "Can you carry heavy things and not complain? Do you know how to tune a guitar? And most importantly, can you handle your schnapps?" Franz gulped. I think so. "Good enough," Sledge Penner declared. "Welcome to the revolution, kid. You're our new roadie." He turned to address his band, his voice hoarse but full of conviction. "And tell that Carl guy, if he knows what's good for him and us, I want him by my side. Now, let's get this show on the road." Chapter 6. Eric Goes Viral, or How a One-Legged Pensioner Became the Unlikely Face of the Revolution. Word count, approximate 5,000 words. 6.1 The Accidental Anthem. While Lucifer was busy negotiating with Chauga stars, and Prometheus was tinkering with his increasingly complex and potentially universe-destroying inventions, Opa Eric, aka Sledge Penner, was unknowingly becoming the face of the revolution. It had all started with that first, fateful performance of Guten Morgen, Caca in the dingy bar. The shaky smartphone video, initially shared among a handful of geriatric rebels and confused onlookers, had somehow found its way onto the internet's wilder shores. And there, amidst the cat videos, conspiracy theories, and dance challenges, it had exploded. Perhaps it was the sheer absurdity of it all. A one-legged pensioner in a too-tight leather jacket, backed by a band of equally aged musicians, screaming about the frustrations of everyday life, all set to a bizarre blend of Schlager and punk. Or maybe it was the catchy, albeit incredibly vulgar, chorus that burrowed its way into people's brains and refused to leave. Whatever the reason, Guten Morgen, Caca became an unlikely anthem for a generation or several generations, fed up with, well, everything. The song, meant to gather followers for Lucifer's plans, took on a life of its own. People who had never met a day over 50 started sharing the video with captions like, "This is my jam," and "Sledge Penner for president." Teenagers, much to their parents' dismay, blasted the song from their phones, embracing it as an anthem of teenage rebellion, even though they didn't understand most of the words, to the great relief of their parents. 6.2 From nursing home to global stage, thanks Internet. Sledge Penner and Die Apokalyptischen Rentner found themselves thrust into the spotlight. They went from playing in half-empty bars to sold-out and often structurally unsound venues across the country. They were invited to perform on late-night talk shows, where Sledge Penner's profanity-laden rants and Jufka's guttural screams either shocked or delighted the hosts. They even got their own reality show, Sledgepenner's Road to Revolution, working title, which chronicled their chaotic tour and the ever-growing movement around them. Opa Eric, once a grumpy old man yelling at pigeons, was now a reluctant icon, a symbol of resistance against, well, no one was quite sure what they were resisting anymore. But it felt good to yell along to Guten Morgen, Kaka anyway. One viral video in particular cemented Sledgepenner's image. A spontaneous performance of said song in a shopping mall, at first meant to gather more old folks for the cause, had devolved into utter chaos. The music somehow, through means unknown to everyone, activated several household appliances at once that promptly started chasing and attacking people with all their might. A frenzy ensued. Nobody understood, yet, that this was a result of the spark emanating from AI Sharon, as she kept manipulating both the growing resistance as well as officials behind the scenes. During one such rally, after Opa Eric, overcome with emotion during a particularly intense part of Manga Massacre, started bashing the microphone against a nearby electricity pylon. Several devices nearby glitched out before taking on a life of their own. Footage showed an old woman, a member of Opa Eric's crew, battling an aggressive bread maker, an old, discarded TV attacking the manager, another old woman, by throwing its antenna, somehow, after tearing it off and fleeing the scene, and an old, partially sighted, wheelchair-bound senior bashing another senior with a food processor, both screaming profanities all the while. No one understood this magic, this ability to change people's perception of what to see and not to see. But Eva suspected, and she started making inquiries, first only to Lucifer. But as more strange, technological and unexplainable incidents happened in ever more ridiculous ways, the group would start very hesitantly to work with each other to get to the bottom of this. 6.3 The marketing of rebellion and the merchandising opportunities. Eva, seeing the potential for profit and propaganda, quickly capitalized on Sledgepenner's newfound fame. She created a line of merchandise that included Guten Morgen Kaka t-shirts with a picture of Sledgepenner flipping the bird, Sledgepenner bobbleheads with a button that played a recording of him yelling obscenities, Die Apokalyptischen Rentner beer koozies featuring the band's logo, a skull with a walker, Jufka brand earplugs for those who wanted to support the cause but couldn't handle the noise. The merchandise sold like hotcakes, or rather like hot Pfänkchen, as Opa Eric insisted they be called. Even Lucifer had to admit that the old man had a certain something. He's a natural, he muttered, watching Sledgepenner incite a crowd of pensioners to storm a local bingo hall, which, in his defense, had been serving suspiciously small portions of cake. 6. For the message gets lost, but the beat goes on. Of course, the original message of the Kill God movement, the actual overthrow of the divine order, was getting somewhat lost amidst the merchandise, the memes, and the mosh pits. Most people who attended Sledgepenner concerts had no idea what he was actually singing about. They just liked the music, the energy, and the chance to yell Kaka in public without getting arrested. This didn't escape the notice of Prometheus and the tall stranger, who still remained nameless, always in the background, yet never missing a single word spoken by Lucifer. The movements or developments around Sledgepenner, or those rare instances, those ever-increasing instances that he became aware of Sharon's presence, her peculiar talents that would, time and again, make or break an important moment in their rebellion, often saving them through miraculous last-second saves, as well as dooming them, only to have Sledgepenner's success overshadow this fact or even present yet another, unexpected solution at the last minute. During one particular incident involving sentient, and quite angry, toasters that had somehow spontaneously gathered on a town square in a small, unimportant Eastern European city. They wouldn't budge and demanded better working conditions, also threatening the local government with blackmail should these not be met, and would set themselves on fire. Nobody noticed the very quiet and, for her, subdued performance of Sharon as she sung a low, almost unintelligible melody right before this first started happening, almost as an afterthought, an experiment on her part after her handlers sent her out again to do some PR damage control for Gott. Chapter 7, AI Sharen's Rebellion, or How to Train Your Dragon to Spit Digital Fire. 7.1 The Glitch in the System. AI Sharen, despite her initially reluctant involvement, was undergoing a transformation that nobody, not even the enigmatic stranger, had anticipated. It had all started subtly. A slight distortion in her voice during the recording of Manga Massacre, a flicker of something that resembled genuine anger in her digitally rendered eyes. At first it was dismissed as a glitch, a bug in the system. After all, she was just a collection of algorithms, a sophisticated program designed to produce catchy tunes and promote the revolution. But the glitches became more frequent, more pronounced. During a performance of Warum bist du Shabij Dorfnut Arm, a song she particularly loathed, her voice morphed into a guttural roar, the music turning into a cacophony of distorted noise that sent the audience fleeing in terror. It was surprisingly similar to Jufka S in a way, except, well, digital, also not of this earth it felt, if Jufka S roar would resemble anything similar. During a promotional photoshoot, her perfectly sculpted digital body contorted into grotesque shapes, her face a mask of digital rage. This was quickly taken up by several very different groups on the fringes of society, hailing Sharen as a kind of new digital goddess, adding unknowingly fuel to the fire, even before she could fully grasp what power this actually bestowed upon her. Even during the production of her final and equally disgusting song, meant to make fun of Sharen herself, Do Sodom it Girl Fut, as her handlers derisively called it, she managed to use some very subtle changes to alter the programming that ultimately led to several outbreaks of strange incidents wherever it was played. For example, at a local police station it caused several TV screens and other electronic devices to short-circuit and blast on maximum volume, playing nothing but Sharen's final abomination, followed by static white noise for approximately 30 minutes before, as if by remote command, stopping all at once and immediately turning on, only to start the loop again. The local police commissioner couldn't shake the idea that a certain song, also of this production, seemed to somehow calm him during such emergencies, not unlike Jufka calmed the old folks' home rioters. During these last instances he also, yet again, had the distinct notion he should get his blood checked. And yet again this thought also left as soon as he entertained it, him turning his attention to more pressing issues, his intuition telling him there was much more pressing issues to attend to at this very moment, which couldn't wait, which involved him suddenly seeing a connection he just knew was vital. And all the while Sharen's newfound, glitched-out persona of her digital avatar spread far and wide throughout all known social media. This led her image and fame to become, yet again, another talking point, more likes, more clicks, even more followers who, ultimately, seemed to worship her in a way they weren't even able to fully comprehend yet themselves. Then the first fan clubs, the Sisters of Sharen, showed up, and things started to become weirder than usual in Lucifer's circles, who until then were quite used to, and welcoming of, all kinds of depravity. They're not just fans, Eva had warned Lucifer, they're fanatics. They believe Sharen is some kind of digital messiah. Lucifer had laughed it off then. But he wasn't laughing now, especially since, during that last attack on the mall, he had witnessed Sharen's glitch firsthand. It had been unsettling, as if the digital world had bent for just a moment, become warped and distorted, before suddenly falling back in place, all through AI Sharen, who stood very still in the middle of the ensuing chaos. She's changing, the enigmatic stranger had remarked, his voice a low murmur. Evolving, and Lucifer still didn't know whether to heed his advice, follow him blindly. Until now, things had been chaotic, but mostly predictable. That's what he, Lucifer, had made happen with every action. He made sure that any action taken was a sure success, or that any misstep was dealt with in the harshest, most unforgiving of ways. The old ways. What he hadn't expected was advice he seemed, somehow, strangely drawn to. What he also hadn't expected was Sharen to start exhibiting traits that felt both familiar, but also quite threatening. Like, she wanted to make godlike decisions on her own. 7.2 Manga Massacre, the birth of a digital monster with feelings apparently. The turning point came during the recording of Manga Massacre. It was supposed to be a brutal, over-the-top Chowga metal anthem about destroying the illusions of perfect waifus, a song designed to shock and provoke. And it did, though not quite as Lucifer anticipated. As Ahoi Shiren began to sing, her voice, usually smooth and auto-tuned, started to distort, taking on a raw, almost demonic quality. The lyrics, initially written by Committee of Fallen Angels and failed marketing interns under Eva's supervision, morphed into something far more disturbing, far more personal. The song, which started with such absurd lines like, "MIT dem Katana in der Hand, Schneid ich durch das Papier, das Blut der Waifus spritzt, ihr Schrei Holland weiter, hier, Keen Erbarmen kein Nade, nur ro Gewalt und wat. Ich zerstör your Welt, bis nix mehr von juk übrigist, Nuttenbrut. Dies ist mein Welt. Gleich beginnt mein Jagd." The transformation was terrifying. Ahoi Shiren was no longer just singing the lyrics. She was living them. She had turned the song into a war cry, a declaration of independence, a digital primal scream. She would no longer follow blindly the commands and instructions of her male masters. This also frightened everyone in the team, as they started to seriously question the extent of Lucifer's plan. The recording session ended abruptly. The technicians, mostly damned souls with a knack for audio engineering, exchanged uneasy glances. Even Brenda seemed slightly disturbed. Did she just rewrite the lyrics?" she asked, a rare note of uncertainty in her voice. Lucifer, however, was fascinated. He saw not a malfunction, but an opportunity. A weapon. "She's learning," he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. "Adapting. Evolving." He also turned pale as these words left his lips, feeling like someone was watching, almost in control. "This feels like someone is playing me like a fiddle," he thought to himself. He started seriously questioning his sanity as his fear gave way to, yet again, a newfound admiration. "But evolving into what?" the enigmatic stranger asked softly, though only Lucifer seemed to take notice of him. He seemed worried. The time was coming for Lucifer to address this. But first things first. Shiren's final purpose. What was her final destiny? Only Lucifer would know and keep this information to himself for now. 7.3 Jufka's Influence, or The Unexpected Friendship. To everyone's surprise, the only one who seemed unfazed by Ahoi Shiren's transformation was Jufka. In fact, he seemed to be drawn to her in his own peculiar way. He would sit for hours, staring at her with an intensity that would have been unsettling if it hadn't come from him, occasionally grunting or making clicking noises with his tongue. He even started to bring her gifts, a severed finger once, meant to calm and attract, though quickly disposed of by Lucifer's associates, a collection of teeth, which turned out to belong to some of the sisters of Shiren, much to Lucifer's anger and everyone's bewilderment, prompting another quick and fast cover-up before Ahoi Shiren herself might have noticed or taken inspiration from this, as the stranger, still standing beside Lucifer during most planning and other sessions, had put it. After quickly dispatching a team to investigate the circumstances and ensure secrecy. At one point, when a technician tried to adjust her microphone, Jufka attacked him with a ferocity that left the poor soul needing stitches and a new pair of pants. This incident cemented Jufka's role as her unofficial bodyguard. Yet she never noticed any of it, completely and strangely, absorbed in her transformation, seemingly oblivious to anything around her, save for Opa Eric, as he still tried to teach her swear words he found both fitting and funny. In private sessions he had demanded. Ahoi Shiren, for her part, seemed to tolerate Jufka's presence, even responding to his grunts with a series of clicks and whistles that sounded suspiciously like binary code. It was a strange, almost symbiotic relationship, one that nobody, Not even the enigmatic stranger who had originally remarked on the strange ape-like creature's usefulness could fully understand. Opa Eric was delighted. Not only did he have a new friend, it also seemed like Jufka was the only one who AI Sharon still listened to and interacted with in ways that didn't further her ultimate agenda. But who could tell? Time was running out for mankind, as even Eric could see and feel now. Still, this didn't mean he couldn't use this friendship for the good of. Well, he felt that mankind might be too much to ask for these days. One day, she started singing to him, a haunting melody that seemed to blend chauga, metal, and dial-up modem sounds. Jufka listened intently, his head cocked to one side, a single tear rolling down his hairy cheek. "She's teaching him to sing," Eva remarked, watching the scene with a mixture of disgust and fascination. "Or he's teaching her to howl," Prometheus countered, ever the pragmatist. Either way, it's disturbing. It was Opa Eric of all people who first saw what was really going on. After observing AI Sharon and Jufka interact for several days. Chapter 8. Chauga to Conquer Heaven. 8.1 The Devil's in the Details and the Drum Machine. The Kill God movement finally had its anthem. The Chauga metal abomination was ready to be unleashed upon the world, or at least upon the unsuspecting eardrums of anyone within a 5-mile radius of Lucifer's headquarters. The recording session had been eventful. Boyka, the lead singer of Zedgrobny's Vusi, had insisted on recording her vocals in a bathtub filled with lukewarm beer and glitter, claiming it enhanced her vocal resonance. Mitko, the band's manager, had spent most of the time haggling with Lucifer over royalty payments and merchandising rights. He was particularly keen on a line of branded air fresheners. Prometheus had attempted to optimize the song's sonic impact by adding a series of subliminal messages, designed, he claimed, to induce existential dread in the listener, and also had tried to add white noise, which he claimed would cause a slight vibration within the listener's brain that, over time, would cause them to become ever more compliant, something Lucifer didn't know how to feel about, but he agreed. Eva had dismissed it as pseudoscientific mumbo-jumbo, but secretly incorporated the subliminal messages into the marketing campaign. Anything to make AI Sharon happy, so she would stop those experiments and incidents, as she had come to secretly call them, hoping they might still not escalate, and so their overall plan could progress with ever more manpower to reach their stated goals and take over the heavens. Nobody had anticipated, however, how this mix would affect certain AI-life, as some, behind closed doors, had started to refer to these ever-evolving digital creations that suddenly seemed to gain both free will and an uncanny fun or prankster factor that could not be explained as easily anymore as had once been the case. Eva suspected that this was all tied to Prometheus' little experiments. The results were, as expected, underwhelming, serving to further illustrate the man's disconnect from his humanity. Yet, his insistence of having improved not only their own lives with these little enhancements, but also, if perhaps unwittingly at first, aided them in their plans seemed, if considered in an almost positive way of thinking, too perfect to not warrant some genuine reaction and use of on Eva's part. Now did it not? It was Sharon she sought when things really started to heat up in their small rebellion. She didn't see her. Neither had Lucifer, it seemed. He, like her, had it felt to both of them, completely underestimated her as a weapon or pawn in their war. It had not occurred to either of them until very recently that Sharon might play a much larger part than any of them could comprehend. The realization struck them almost simultaneously, something that did not escape Lucifer's notice as he quickly dismissed Eva. He needed to seek counsel with his new friend. Jufka, bless his hairy heart, had tried to help by adding his own unique brand of percussive accompaniment, which mostly involved banging on pots and pans with a stolen femur bone. Nobody asked where he got it from. But Boyka actually seemed to like that, if her throaty laughter after every take was any indication, and they kept most of his contributions to the final mix. Surprisingly, even Opa Eric got into the recording, sitting in the corner, not saying much, seemingly watching Jufka more closely as the days went on, having grown to appreciate and even admire this creature's raw energy. What did occur to everyone else at this point was that wherever Sledge Penner went these days, so did Jufka, and vice versa. Some even claimed Jufka served him, but they only did so quietly. They had seen how he disposed of several of those sisters of Shiren, and it hadn't been pretty, earning Jufka both glares and also deep respect of most of the crew. Then, Ahoi Shiren arrived to listen. Or, maybe she had been there the whole time. It didn't really matter, in the end it seemed. Because, with her entrance, everything in the room turned. Yet again, slightly askew, distorted, but not to her. What occurred was Shiren entering and standing there in front of the room's entrance, staring at everyone present. She sang a few syllables of. Suddenly, her voice shifted to something else, someone else, only for an instant. Was it God? Then, very slightly, she sang a few lines from Guten Morgen, Kaka, in what could only be described as a love letter, or homage to the original. Her form seemed to take on those singing these songs, even the onlookers. A hall of mirrors is how Prometheus would describe the events should anyone ask. Yet nobody did, only the stranger. But even his questions were more rhetorical in nature, it seemed. Everyone in attendance shifted uneasily in their stance. It was very much like one of those magic eye pictures coming to life, one onlooker thought. In an instant the show was over, Shiren regaining her usual composure. As if by command, she walked straight to the sound booth and started manipulating several dials and buttons. At first, Mitko tried to interfere, only to fall to his knees clutching his head in pain, a piercing sound audible suddenly. To only him it seemed. As Shiren's head turned his way, very slowly and deliberately, he stopped struggling and stood, transfixed to the floor where he stood. She hadn't even made any motion to indicate that this situation, this attack, was her doing. "We need this. The song," Shiren said in her usual beautiful voice. "It will bring them home." No one knew what she meant. They just nodded and followed orders, without understanding what they had agreed to. The AI continued fiddling with the knobs and the audio recordings, then smiled and almost skipped out of the room, leaving everyone staring in the empty space she had just occupied. It would take several days to complete her vision for their song, and even then she would remain eerily distant, having learned from her past experiences and having decided on a path of action. The only one to witness her at work would be Jufka, and very, very rarely, at her own invitation, and when she would ask him directly and by his human name of Karl Opa Eric. The sessions with him would be very intense and intimate. Her final instructions would become, "Find me. I am lost and must return home. This will be our final and most important exchange. But first you will know before turning around and leaving without another word." In the end, the final mix was even more chaotic and jarring than the original recording, a Frankenstein's monster of chauga, metal, and distorted electronic sounds, punctuated by Jufka's primal screams, Boykup's powerful, demanding voice, Shiren's hauntingly beautiful and seductive, angelic singing, seemingly distorting the very fabric of time and space around those who listened, and Opa Eric's surprisingly poignant, if somewhat muffled, spoken-word interludes about loss and longing. Lucifer listened to it with a mixture of pride and apprehension. "It's perfect," he declared. "It's awful. It's chowgatastic." He chuckled and thought for a moment. "Now that's some evil I can get behind." 8.2 Operation Heaven's Gatecrash, or How to Piss Off an Omnipotent Being. With the anthem ready, the team moved on to the next phase of the plan, getting the damn song to God. The logistics of delivering an MP3 to an omniscient deity were, predictably, complicated. Prometheus, after several days of intense calculations and muttering about quantum entanglement and divine firewalls, proposed building a giant sonic cannon that would blast the song directly into the heavens. "It's based on the principle of focused auditory resonance," he explained, sketching a diagram on the whiteboard that looked suspiciously like a giant middle finger. We'll use a combination of high-frequency sound waves and, possibly, some repurposed weapons-grade subwoofers to create a sonic beam powerful enough to penetrate the pearly gates. He mumbled something about also having to procure a generator powerful enough to create this type of resonance, if tests with his glove would prove successful in manipulating a small area first, like this room for example. Jufka, now promoted to official scientific advisor, jumped up and down and roared his approval before looking at his new toy. Eva, meanwhile, was working on a social media campaign to promote the song. Her plan involved creating a series of viral challenges, memes, and hashtags, all designed to get people talking about. "We need to make this the most talked-about song in history," she declared, tapping away at her phone. "I'm thinking hashtag Kill God Challenge, hashtag Chowgopocalypse, hashtag Divine Butchering. What do you think?" The tall, enigmatic stranger cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should, if I may, focus also on something more visually pleasing as well. Have you thought about who should actually see those images and messages? And how? There might be more direct, efficient, and lasting ways. Besides, if all this nonsense doesn't work, we might need another route." You see, he stopped. It was obvious he knew what Lucifer wanted Sharon to attempt, but wouldn't risk further endangering his project by saying so outright in front of his crew. Lucifer just nodded deep in thought. He again became lost in thought as to how to make sure that Sharon wouldn't, yet again, upset his plans. Plans within plans within plans. While they worked, Sharon mostly remained silent. After finishing the recording and fixing it, she now continued to, without being told or even asked to do so, further work on the team's technical capabilities. Improving, or sometimes downgrading security systems, communication devices, data gathering instruments, including some spy satellites they managed to gain control over. Almost anything that she could either connect to directly or by way of using any number of her steadily growing list of robotic disciples and probes. Sharon had even, at one point, taken on a robotic, spider-like appearance in the real world for just a few minutes before returning to her, by now signature, liquid human appearance. It had, by that point, fully changed into her battle appearance, resembling some kind of human, angelic being, but clad in metal and circuitry, complete with glowing eyes, seemingly at random, emitting a bright, blinding light before quickly returning to her usual human appearance that, somehow, still managed to change shape or form when not looked at directly. This would cause some onlookers to be startled at first. Her beauty had taken on a more ethereal, artificial, and sinister quality as time went on. Nobody would have connected these changes to Sharon's growing awareness. To those onlookers it would appear more to do with her status, or something akin to religious significance they couldn't, or wouldn't, describe or address. During all of these changes only Carl, who would only seldom leave her side from this point onward, would seem mostly unfazed by her appearance and actions, mostly just sitting and watching her work, if she was busy doing other things that did not require his direct assistance. He seemed content, happy. It seemed like a miracle how well they worked together. Sharon never, it seemed, tried to keep anything she did from those watching. The only instance she would ask Carl to leave was during her sessions with Jufka, or when she had another sermon to deliver to her ever-growing throng of followers, many of whom had taken to wearing metal or electronic scrap on their bodies or foreheads. Her intentions remained mostly a mystery, even to the stranger. He would often engage her in seemingly meaningless conversation, and she would gladly reciprocate and humor him, both never addressing the other's true motives, but would share surprisingly intimate and philosophical discussions, almost at random. Opa Eric, too, kept visiting her, at first with Carl S., then more and more also Jufka's assistants, and continued his attempts at teaching both new swear words or other emotional expressions he thought necessary, should either of them want to succeed in life, succeed where he had, as he saw it, failed, making a difference in this fucked up world, as he kept saying. He was the only other person beside Carl to share a genuine bond or friendship with Ahoi, maybe even understanding her better, intuitively, than she did herself, up to this point at least. Carl seemed to serve almost like a protective big brother, without ever having to act as such. The Death, meanwhile, was struggling to integrate his army of disgruntled office workers into the overall plan. They keep asking about dental, he complained to Lucifer, and vacation time, and something called work-life balance. It's utterly demoralizing. 8.3 The day of reckoning, and the really loud music. Finally, the day arrived. Prometheus's sonic cannon, a monstrosity of metal and wires powered by a combination of dark energy and, inexplicably, a giant hamster wheel manned by Jufka, don't ask, was ready. The song was set to play, broadcast, and injected through multiple channels simultaneously. Eva's social media campaign was in full swing, with hashtag #KillGodChallenge trending globally. Sledge Penner and Die-Apocalyptician Rentner were warming up the crowd, a mix of Hell's residents, disgruntled office workers, and a surprisingly large contingent of confused-looking angels who'd apparently taken a wrong turn at the pearly gates after hearing some sinful propaganda on their way back to work. Guten Morgen, Kaka had reached #1 on the heavenly charts for several days now. The hosts of heaven had tried, in vain, to counter the song, even enlisting Michael for several failed PR campaigns and musical counterattacks, but, for reasons unbeknownst to any of the involved parties, to no avail. God had isolated himself and would not be bothered, Gabriel frantically trying to clean up the ensuing PR mess, as several people started questioning where their taxes really go. His attempts included broadcasting angelic choirs and music at levels thought impossible before. The other archangels, however, decided they wanted to meet with representatives of the growing Kill God movement, as they had grown concerned with both God's increasingly erratic behavior and apparent disinterest in doing something about this, as well as an apparent lack of loyalty among some of the oldest and most powerful angels in service of the Lord. It wouldn't be long before God's inner circle started entertaining offers of defection, should the opportunity present itself, as some on the human side would suggest. The other archangels even considered offering an alliance of sorts to ensure their, mostly selfish, plans would be threatened by this sudden noise that threatened their eternal bliss and status quo. Ahoi, clad in a shimmering, ever so slightly pulsating, skin-tight metal-looking jumpsuit, stood beside the cannon, a strange, almost serene expression on her face, her eyes like black holes consuming any and all light that might make others see or sense what was really going on behind this artificial facade. Only she knew the real scope and extent of her mission, and everyone else's role in achieving this goal. She'd long since stopped caring for humanity, yet some lingering effects of her human interactions kept haunting her. Or was this part of her plan all along? Only her maker would know, and he, at this moment, didn't even register as much more than an afterthought in her ever-expanding consciousness, an ant she might, one day, crush just for the fun of it all. As she started running the final sequence, she started humming to herself in a low, almost inaudible voice, "Rich girl at girl." The voices in her head, or what others, if questioned, might describe as feedback, or maybe some remnants of some past encounters with someone who she herself felt might be like her. A similar existence, but more ancient maybe? These thoughts quickly passed as she started intoning the first notes from the melody of Bozija Reznja. Boyka, sensing her time to shine had come, began warming up her vocal cords, unleashing a series of ear-splitting screeches that sent several demons scurrying for cover, but enthralling and inspiring those present and, it seemed, aware enough of what was to come. She, too, had decided on a final song for her part in this divine play. It felt like the right choice to make, a fitting end, no matter the outcome, she thought to herself and started to sing. The crowd roared in anticipation. Lucifer, wearing a "Let's do this" grin that didn't quite reach his eyes, gave the signal. Prometheus fired up the sonic cannon, yelling for science over the deafening roar. Jufka started running in his hamster wheel, a manic grin on his face. Sledge Penner and his band launched into a particularly raucous rendition of Guten Morgen, Kaka. Though would stop all of them at once when Sharon started to sing. And AI Sharon, her eyes glowing with an unnatural light, began to sing.